Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on us. Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on us. Some Pharisees came and said to Jesus, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." Jesus does not run away, seek to hide, or avoid his destiny. He knows where he must go, and nothing will deter him from getting there. We hear him say that he is on his way to Jerusalem. The story will continue in Jerusalem on Palm Sunday morning. In the Gospel of the Liturgy of the Palms, we will hear the last line of today's Gospel. "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven, glory in the highest heaven." All our readings today prepare us to hear and live the gospel through the example of Jesus and his faith to the cross that will bear new life for all. In the opening collect, we hear empathetic words for those who, unlike Jesus' straight and undeterred path to Jerusalem, go astray. We hear of God's mercy when we fail to live into the spirit of the gospel. The Old Testament empathetically continues with the comforting words, "Do not be afraid." The Psalm words also bring us much comfort. "The Lord is my light and salvation. Though an army should encamp against me, yet shall my heart not be afraid." The gospel follows Jesus' journey to his death and resurrection. The psalm reminds us of our own journey. You and I who seek to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of our life. Our journey is to seek him in the temple and sing praises to God. Our journey, though, is not straight, for we must constantly discern the path to Christ. There are many distractions along the way. We are easily frightened. We are easily lost. If a group of people came to me and said, "There's danger ahead, somebody's going to kill you," I would not proceed forward. I would definitely go the other way. Just this week, I was telling a friend about growing up in the Bronx in New York City. The number of times I, as a young man, encountered danger and the long-lasting impact that I've had to battle against fear. When I was about 12 years old, I remember going to the late show for the 2001 Space Odyssey film. It had just come to the Bronx. I went with my two older brothers to the 10:30 p.m. show that did not get out until almost 1 a.m. The movie was, now I've looked it up, I don't know this from memory, but I looked it up yesterday. The movie was 2 hours and 48 minutes, putting us out sometime at about 1:15 in the morning. So we were coming out at this time. We were coming out with crowds. Lots of people had been there. Everyone wanted to see this movie. We walked a few blocks, and my brother Bill said that he realized he had forgotten his gloves. So all three of us went back to the theater and retrieved Billy's gloves. Then we proceeded to return home. Now it's about 1:45 a.m. and the streets are empty. No one's around. The theater is about 7 blocks from where we lived. To get home, we had to go under elevated tracks. You know, the L in New York, the old L's that used to be there? Going under those L's in certain sections of the Bronx, even in the light of day, was a dangerous thing. And as we waited for the green light at about 1:45 in the morning, and my other two brothers were talking because they're 5 to 10 years older than me, and I was just dragging along to be with them, the little guy. Out of nowhere came a big man with a butcher knife that I've never seen any bigger since. And my brothers are talking, and this guy tries to grab me. I screamed. I screamed and I began to run as fast as I could. We all ran. The crazed man ran after us. I thought he'd be like, stop, but no, he kept on going after us. Fortunately, and this would never happen today, fortunately, a yellow taxi came and we all got into the taxi. As the taxi pulled away, the crazed man attempted to open the cab door, but fortunately, he could not. We were safe, though our hearts were beating so fast. Even as I recalled this story this week, I could feel my whole body tense up. So, I might have been with the Pharisees telling Jesus to go another direction. For many years, I think that late night incident in the Bronx rattled me. Well into my young adult life, I would avoid dark and lonely streets. And then I realized, about 21, 22, when I was traveling for business, that my life was controlled by fear. Moving out of the city didn't help me much. Fear had left its mark on me, and I had to find ways to resist giving in to fear, or my life was not going to be the life I wanted. I had to teach myself to recognize the signs of fear and then to walk away from it, walk through it. In doing this, pushing myself through fear, I was able to learn how to drive when I was over 40 years old in Pasadena when I moved there. That's a story for another day. How I didn't know how to drive until I was 40, and how I learned how to drive. Pushing myself through fear, I have been able to move beyond the Duggan family and my parents who going a great distance was to go from the Bronx to Queens every summer for the beach, and now going to India and to Africa and to Australia and to South Korea, all those places. And still I prefer to go with a companion, and I think it goes back to that night in the Bronx. This past week, a new medical study revealed that trauma is sometimes passed from generation to generation. Mount Sinai in New York conducted a genetic study of 32 Jewish men and women who had either been interned in a Nazi concentration camp, witnessed or experienced torture, or who had to hide during the Second World War. The research team concluded that genetic changes stemming from trauma suffered by Holocaust survivors are capable of being passed on to their children, the clearest sign that one's person's life experience can affect subsequent generations. The way it works is that genetic tags pass trauma from one generation to the next. I did a little bit of research this week because I wanted to know a little bit about Herod. I didn't know enough about Herod. We see him in the gospel a couple of times throughout the year. And the first article I picked up on the internet described Herod as a madman who murdered his own family and a great many rabbis. When he was a newborn baby, Jesus escaped death by Herod. Herod's father was this guy by the name of Antipater, and he was the founder of the Herodian dynasty. A political rival assassinated Herod's father. Looking back on history through the lens of this past week's Mount Sinai study, it is likely that Herod's violence had been passed down to him by his parents and grandparents. And the little bit of research I did this week on the Pharisees, many of the Pharisees were inclined to violence. One does not enter the kingdom of God through violence. One enters the kingdom of heaven through meekness and humility. Violence will come upon Jesus after he enters Jerusalem. Until Jerusalem, many will try to protect Jesus from those who wish to hurt him. Go the other way. Once again, You and I will observe the way Jesus responds to violence. Throughout his passion, Jesus will maintain his clarity of God's vision, leading him to the cross, the empty tomb, and the appearance to Mary and the women, the disciples, and eventually to us. Jesus is unafraid of the violence that will come his way. Jesus does not retaliate violence with violence. Jesus does not seek a safer path. Jesus does not avoid the cup that he is to drink from. And Jesus is even gentle with everyone who will betray him. He's gentle with Judas and Pilate and even the centurion soldiers. Jesus comes from a generation of peace that does not bring trauma that destroys us, but rather transforms all life. Jesus comes from Mary, who is told by the angel not to be afraid. Jesus inherits this patient lack of fear in living God's vision. Jesus is like us in every way, but he has not sinned. Jesus does not come out of generations of trauma, but out of the vision of God for a new kingdom of life and peace. God knows that we will inevitably go astray on our journey to live out the gospel. We yearn to be with Jesus, but you and I humbly accept that we are not Jesus. We are instruments. Once again, the beautiful prayer of St. Francis on our columbarium walls. We are instruments of peace. We're instruments of God's grace and glory. We need to take care of our instruments so that you and I can play beautiful music. This past week, here at St. Francis, we had our 2 pianos tuned. And yesterday, Apple returned to me my laptop after 5 days of being serviced over in the Arden Arcade Mall. I needed a whole new keyboard because 2 keys were broken, the E and the T. Every time I wrote a sermon or writing stuff, the E and the T would fly off and I'd have to put it back in. And to show you how crazy I am and how stubborn I am, my down cursor would not work for over 5 months. And so I would put the cursor over here and drag it down. Stephanie taught me how to do that. Have you ever attempted to live without a down cursor? It's not easy. But I'm stubborn, and I did it for 5 months. Over the course of the first week of Lent, with all of this tuning of pianos in my laptop, I've been wondering about the other broken keys in my life that I've allowed myself to be accommodated to and lulled into not getting tuned up. In many ways, Lent offers all of us time and means to tune our own instruments, that is, our bodies, our minds, and our hearts, so that in all we are and all that we do, we reflect God's glory and love to all people. All of us, every single one of us in this room, play beautiful music of God's love with our instruments. And sometimes, when either we are out of tune or playing in a minor key, we are not as strong in our faith and action as we would desire or God desires. Sometimes we adapt ourselves to becoming the broken keyboard rather than submitting ourselves to a tune-up. But when we are strengthened by God's love and mercy, we're able to pick ourselves up, growing in faith, perseverance, and desire to serve God. Lent is a time we ought to make sure we are following God's vision of love and not accommodating ourselves to the violence of the world, our violent memories, or the violence done unto us. I close today with some inspiring words from St. Augustine. God of our life, There are days when the burdens we carry chafe. Our shoulders and arms weigh us down. When the road seems dreary and endless, the skies gray and threatening. When our lives have no music in them, and our hearts are lonely, and our souls have lost their courage. Flood the path with light. Turn our eyes to where the skies are full of promise. Tune our hearts to brave music. Give us the sense of comradeship with saints and heroes of every age, and so quicken our spirits that we may be able to encourage all who journey with us on the road of life, to your honor and to your glory, O God. God bless you. At this time, I'd like to invite